before I take the sediment, and this will take a moment to come up on the screen. Thank you. I have Councillor Anderson present. Apologies from Councillor Buchanan and Campbell. Councillor Convery is present. Is Councillor Cooper at the meeting? We don't have Councillor Cooper. Councillor Dorman is here. Is Councillor Dryber present? No. We have Councillor Fagan, Councillor Ferguson. Is Councillor Gray present? No. I have Councillor Harrow and Councillor MacDonald here. Is Councillor McAdams with us?
Apologies from...
Sorry, apologies from... I didn't quite catch who the apologies were from.
It looks as if he's frozen.
It does, aye, yeah. I'd be assuming it would be Councillor McAdams. That's the name you just said.
It would just
apologies from Councillor McAdams.
All right.
Apologies, yeah.
Thank you.
I just froze as soon as I was saying it.
We have Councillor Miller present and Councillor Scott. Councillor Stevenson? No. Councillor Wardle and Councillor Watson are with us as well. So thank you. I'll now pass you back to the Chair for today's business.
Thank you, Helen. Do we have any declarations of interest? Councillor Watson.
Yeah, Chair, I would like to declare a declaration of interest in community grants. The first one in the community grants, East Kilbride Youth Disability Sports Club. I'm Vice Chair of that organisation.
Okay, thank you, David. And then also declare an interest in agenda item 5. I'm a member of Friends of Stonehouse Park. Hugh?
Thanks, Chair. I'd like to declare an interest. The same item as David Watson.
Okay, thank you. That everyone for that item? The minutes of the previous meeting in pages 3 to 6 from the 11th of August. Can we agree they are submitted as approval of a correct record?
Agreed, Chair.
Agreed, thank you. We're moving on to detector legislation, and that's a presentation by Phil MacDonald of the Station Commander of East Kilbride and Straven Fire Service, Strathclyde Fire and Rescue Services. So I'll hand you over to Philip.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, everybody. I would just like to introduce myself. I am Station Commander Phil MacDonald, and I'm the Commander of East Kilbride Fire Station and Straven Fire Station. Overall responsibility for 2 stations in the station grounds. I recently took up the post in May, having been a previous Station Commander within the Highland Local Senior Officer area. Yeah, very interesting. We've just had a merge as well from having the South Lanarkshire Local Senior Officer area to now merge with North Lanarkshire to have the one Lanarkshire Senior Officer area. So we have the one area commander, which is Stephen Wright, dealing with yourselves and the chief exec for both councils. So, Chair, I'm here today to present a short presentation, and I promise you it won't be death by PowerPoint. It's 6 slides on the new detector legislation and how Scottish Fire and Rescue Service, in particular stations within East Kilbride and Straven, are going to support your constituents and members of the community within that area. I'm quite happy if anybody's got any questions as I move along Chair, maybe to get, if it goes through yourself, or if you want to leave it to the end, I'm quite happy to answer questions at the end. So if it's okay with you, Chair, I'll just proceed, and I'll just use it from, I'll just share my screen if that's okay, and you can let me know. Sorry, Chair, 2 seconds. I did have this prepared earlier, so apologies.
No problem. It's fine.
I don't know. Can everybody see that, the presentation?
See it now, thank you.
Okay, that's great. Okay. So this is a presentation on behalf of the Lanarkshire LSO area, and it's looking at the legislation that's going to change around smoke detection, heat detection and carbon monoxide detection within every home in Scotland as from February 2022. So a bit of brief background. The Housing Scotland Act 1987 created a tolerable standard for heat and smoke detection within properties. Bolted onto that, or as an additional function, there was an order came in 2019 that introduced a new element to that. And that new element was the introduction of smoke and heat detector alarms as a new tolerable standard. And it was in recognition of the danger that fire poses to occupants of a house, and it's intended to reduce the risk of loss of life and injury and damage to property in the event of a fire. So just briefly, I think around about the early 80s, initially when it was Strathclyde Fire Brigade and fire brigades across the country, there was a push to get smoke detection into properties, because at that time we were running about between 100 and 150 fatalities from domestic house fires in Scotland year after year, which is thankfully has gradually come down with the introduction of mains wired smoke detectors in new premises, legislation around houses of multiple occupancy, and generally the kind of education that's been out there both from local authorities and from the Fire and Rescue Service. Probably the best example I can give you is through the home fire safety visits that we've been kind of running since about 2003, 2004. So a bit of background to it. It was following the tragic events of Grenfell Tower that in Scotland we set up a ministerial working group which was made up of all stakeholders, including trade unions, fire safety advisors, both from the public and private sector, and building standards experts. And basically they formed a working group, and the Building and Fire Safety Working Group was formed. One of the recommendations in that group was to bring forward a planned consultation on the standard that should be installed for heat and smoke detection within domestic properties. The results of that consultation have led to a change in the legislation which extends to all domestic properties in Scotland. So those regulations, some of you may well be aware or may not be aware, should have come into force in February of 2021. However, due to the COVID pandemic, and it wasn't greatly advertised, that the Scottish Parliament agreed to delay the implementation of the legislation for a period of 12 months. So that legislation then becomes law in February of 2022. However, we still believe in what would be asked is to work in partnership, with local housing officers, with local housing organisations, that we would still recommend that the installation of a smoke detector at the earliest opportunity will provide improved fire safety within the home. So what will those requirements be? So what we'll require is that one smoke detector is installed in the room most frequently used for general daytime living purposes. For example, the main living room within the house. And there'll be one smoke alarm in every circulation space on each storey, such as a hallway and a landing. And one heat alarm is to be installed in every kitchen. There's also a requirement for a carbon monoxide detector or alarm to be fitted where there is a carbon-fuelled appliance. Now that's such as a boiler, a fire, an open fire, a heater or a stove or a flue. What most people will find is that if they have a service agreement with either Scottish Power or Scottish Gas, then when those boilers are serviced every year, they will either provide one or the engineer will recommend the installation of a carbon monoxide detector. So the detector's standard has got to be tamper-proof, and it's got to have a long-life lithium battery alarm, which can be fitted by the householders themselves or by a qualified technician, or in our case, in certain circumstances, the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service. It can also be a means wired alarm, is what is the traditional alarms are just now, which are cheaper than tamper-proof long-life battery alarms, but should be installed by a qualified electrician in accordance with the British Standard 7671. So it's the occupant's responsibility as the owner to meet the new fire and smoke alarm standard. Again, private rented properties or houses of multiple occupancy, as we class them, the standard is enforced by the right of the tenant, so it must be fitted by the landlord. And again, where the local authority housing exists, the local authorities may use their statutory powers to carry out work on their own housing stock. Currently, the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service are fitting interlinked alarms into high-risk owner-occupied homes. So basically, every alarm must be linked. So if one alarm goes off in the kitchen, the alarm will go off in the upstairs landing. And it's to give that early indication to the house owner or tenant of the potential of fire within the property. So rather than leave a home which is not high risk as per our home fire safety policy unprotected, we will continue as an organisation to install our current single point alarms where appropriate, and we will continue to advise the occupier of the change to the legislation and to either fit to the new standard themselves or contact the landlord or local authority housing agency to have the interlinked alarms fitted. And that's important just now because our criteria for fitting these alarms will be into high risk privately owned properties. So we go out and we judge that the individual meets the criteria because there's potential for alcohol dependency. There's evidence of misuse of cooking, of smoking activities, or there's evidence there has been historical incidents of fire violence towards that individual. As long as it's a privately owned property, then SFRS personnel will install the Bluetooth smoke detection in the area specified by the legislation. If they don't, then we will continue to fit our single point smoke detectors, but I must stress they are not linked to each other. So they're not Bluetooth linked, and we don't fit, obviously, for obvious purposes, mains wired battery backup smoke detection. And that is basically it. It's a short presentation, Chair, but I'm absolutely delighted to take any questions from any colleagues from the council or who are on the call that may have that get any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Phil. That was very interesting, very informative. Hugh, I think you've got the first for your hand up.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Phil. I'm just interested in what constitutes high risk in terms of property.
Okay, so in terms of high risk, your guidance is just now that, as I said in the presentation, A, it's got to be private, it's got to be a privately owned house, and B, we would look at evidence of, is there major health issues within that property? Is the person alcohol dependent? Is there evidence that we have had historical mobilisations to that property for cooking, for smoking related activity, or is there fire violence, i.e. somebody said their house, something put through the letterbox, or there's been willful fire raised into the property? We would constitute that as high risk. And then we would make consideration then of fitting that Bluetooth smoke detection and that carbon monoxide detector. So the heat alarm in the kitchen, the 2 alarms down the stairs, the room of most occupancy, i.e. the living room, downstairs hallway, and then the upstairs hallway. But notwithstanding that, again, if we went out to a property and the individual didn't meet the criteria, we would still continue to fit those single point smoke detectors. But I would stress that they're not interlinked, they're battery operated. The additional funding to purchase these smoke detectors, i.e. the interlinked Bluetooth smoke detectors, has came from Scottish Government. So I don't know if that answers your question or not. Certainly there are some education leaflets, some correspondence out there within the local libraries, within the local fire stations. And again, an individual member can, the community can always phone for a home fire safety visit, and then the fire service would come out and risk assess that property. I don't know if that answers the colleague's question.
Thanks, Phil. There was just one slight follow-up in it, and that was, is there anything about the construction of buildings that would make them high risk, such as, I know there's a kind of open plan type fad for some of the residents that I've got in my ward, so I was just wondering if that would be included as high risk because there's no sort of firewalls or anything like that to sort of hold back fire if it started.
Well, Councillor, not to my knowledge. I can certainly get back to you on that, but from the information that I've been provided with and that I've seen, we wouldn't take that into consideration. It would just be the individual's own specific circumstances and the risks that individual would face within the property.
Okay, thanks, Phil.
Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Thanks for the presentation. I think you've covered some of the first point I had about the high risk. I would maybe add to that, what is the position with maybe vulnerable elderly or individuals with maybe learning difficulties or physical disabilities? Would they be construed as high risk? And I've got a couple other points. I don't know if you want to answer that first or not.
So again, Councillor, we offer a certain amount of discretion to our commander. So if the watch commander or the crew commander went out as part of that crew, and what we've said, if they feel based on their risk assessment at that point in time, if the individual would benefit from getting that additional interlinked smoke detection fitted, then we offer that discretion and we would allow them to fit it. So I guess it's based on a judgment call. I think, you know, and we've expressed that and we've given that instruction to those individual watch officers that when they go out, they can use their discretion to install these. So that where I've said there's parameters, they can look at it on an individual basis and say, we think the risk warrants that this individual would benefit from that additional installation of that Bluetooth smoke detection. Then they have that power to do that. I don't know if that...
No, that's fine. Thanks, just now. Maybe just move on to the other points I've got. I'll just rattle them all off so you can answer them together.
Sorry to interrupt, but very quickly, Phil, would you mind please stop sharing your screen?
Certainly. Apologies, Chair.
Thank you.
Is that better? Do apologise. Sorry about that.
Okay. My understanding, and I think if I'm picking you up right, my understanding was wrong, that these would all to be electric hardwired, but I think you're saying as long as they've got a lithium long life battery that they can be used and that they're interlinked Bluetooth, so that would be acceptable. They don't need to be hardwired, and I think I'm picking up that right, yeah.
Yeah, so currently what you'll see in especially in a lot of new build properties, or properties get, you know, there's a change to the building layout. What you will see getting fitted is a mains wired battery backup. Now the idea of that is primarily it's powered by the mains, but in the event of a mains power failure, there's a battery backup there, so it always means that individual or that area within that property will always be covered. As technology's moved on and we move to more kind of Bluetooth to stop floors getting lifted and walls getting raggled for the installation of cables and whatever, we're fitting now. We're allowed to fit now the new Bluetooth smoke detection. So the idea is we pair the detectors in the house or at the station. It can be quite footery and it can take a wee bit of time. So we pair those detectors, and then the crews will go out and install those detectors within the areas of the property. So I guess it's just a step moving on with technology. We now, in order that we don't have to run cables and people don't have the expense of getting an electrician in, they can, for example, go to a local electrical supplier, Screwfix being one, or B&Q or whatever, and they can install those detectors themselves without need to get an electrician in to start, disrupting the household.
Yeah, okay.
So it's just a lot easier. It allows us to go in, certainly, and it's better for us, it's easier for us, because it saves time, and then we can get through so many properties in a day.
No, that's right. And the other one just being, am I right in saying with what I'm hearing, it's living spaces but not bedrooms? You don't need to include the bedrooms with the interlinked one. And just the last point being, would the fire service be recommending reputable suppliers so that we're cutting out maybe, the unscrupulous prying on people to maybe get installation work or sell stuff that people don't need?
Yeah. So in answer to your last question, no, because I don't think I think as a public organisation you can't be seen to be promoting individuals. I think that would just lead to chaos out there within the construction industry, and especially within the electricians. I guess your local trading standards or whatever would be able to advise on, or people of if they experienced that the installation went wrong or it was poorly installed, then they would have recourse to trading standards. We wouldn't go out there and specifically recommend individual contractors. If we went out, councillor, and an individual is confined to bed, say, for example, as I had for an elderly gentleman in an incident a couple of weeks ago, if that is where they spend most of the day, then there would be nothing stopping us saying, right, okay, we've risk assessed it. That's the area of most circulation. So therefore, that's where we're going to install one of those detectors, or potentially an additional detector that we can pair with other detectors in the house. So absolutely, it's on a risk-by-risk basis. And if the individual officer or firefighter goes there and deems that's where that detector is going to be fitted, then that's where it will be fitted.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Grant?
I'm really sorry, I missed the start because you were sharing the screen, so I missed the start. So I'm trying to kind of catch up. So apologies if I say something that you've actually explained. I've got two things I want to talk about. You mentioned the high risks. Now, I'm wondering, would the members of the BSL community be classified as high risk? And also, when would you recommend to deaf people, BSL users who can't, through incidental learning or other natural ways of finding out, to recommend somebody who would be able to come in and fit the alarm and attach it to the flashing elements? Because obviously a standardised alarm has to be adapted for deaf people so that it becomes visual. And I know that individuals will be panicky and want to make sure that they get the right one that ensures their safety. So that and also show them the right kind of models that are available.
Okay, so thanks very much for your question, councillor. And again, down to individual contractors, we would not be in a position to recommend those individual contractors, but we have existing partnerships with deaf services and social services where we would be more than happy to do a joint visit with the individual, whether it be social services, deaf services, with the individual being present, to look at that individual circumstances, risk assess that property, and put in place a bespoke package that would ensure, to the best of our ability, that individual would be able to identify when an actuation takes place and identify how they would create that, prepare a means of escape which would get them out of that property and in the safest and quickest possible manner. And to over and above that, what I have experienced and measures that we do put in place is where we come across an individual member of the community, we would then share that information both with our operational control room and with the surrounding stations. So in the event that there was a mobilisation to that property, the officers that were attending had all that information to hand and then would be able to make a judgment call or a risk assessment based on the individual needs of that householder on arrival. So I guess it's about us going out, it's about us sharing information with our partners and supporting that individual as best as we possibly can from a fire and rescue service perspective.
absolutely lovely. Thank you for that. I have never knew that the fire service had shared, if they knew that a deaf person or somebody was a particular risk at an area, that they would know that, and that information. That was news to me. And I just, is that what you're saying? I mean, I think it's a great thing to do if you're sharing it with partners that you know and within this fire service. But just knowing that if that is the case, then that would be really good for the deaf community to feel even know that they're safer, that you guys are aware. And I think it's something that really, it would be good if you could do that, so that the community out there actually know what you're there to provide and all the things you have been providing. And I think it's important that it's done from you guys, but also in their own language, in sign language.
So then I guess, sorry, as a news station commander, then I would make a proposal that everything around now is about partnership working, and as a community team, working together, then we can share information, and that's how we best support our members of the community. So I would then make the offer that we meet up, and if we can meet up with local organisations, support organisations, then more than happy to share that information so as everybody is aware and everybody knows what the referral pathways are to support that individual as best as we possibly can.
Councillor Fagan says he would be delighted to sit down with you. Thank you. Brilliant.
Thank you.
Great,
Thank you.
We've got a plan. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you very much for that. Jim?
Yeah, I learned something new today. I need to get 4 alarms and not 3 because I've got a gas fire in the living room. I'm not sure whether, should have a carbon monoxide detector and a smoke detector in the kitchen, but that's by the way. My main point is to follow up on what Councillor Watson said. I know you can't recommend makes and retail outlets for equipment, but as sure as night follows day, the scammers are going to be out in force. They're probably out now stocking up lockups all over the place with alarms and things. Will you cooperate with the police, to detect scams, and have a kind of system whereby when a scam is discovered or detected, that there's a combined response by the police and the fire service to make sure that scam gets shut down as quickly as possible, and to publicise it to the public. And if the public were suspicious that there was a scam, would you recommend that they contact yourselves or the police to say they thought there was maybe a scam taking place?
Thanks, Councillor, for your question. Yeah, absolutely. If I think my memory serves me correct, I did see a circular last week that we're getting people going door to door trying to sell people smoke alarms and promising installation. And you're right, we simply can't recommend people to fit, our individual contractors to fit. But if we get intelligence that there were people, there were scammers out there, so to speak, or with the experience of going out to a property potentially after an incident and there was poor workmanship or whatever, then I think it was definitely as an organisation we would have a duty to share that with the police. So, for example, within East Kilbride we have the community hub where we meet every Wednesday, and police colleagues are there, the council colleagues are there, and that's the sort of information that if we got intelligence on, that we would be sharing that. We would have a duty to share that with police colleagues. So if I could put you at ease and say that if we found out that was going on or any intelligence, that we would immediately be sharing that with the police. We have no responsibility, to the best of my knowledge, in terms of prosecuting somebody for fitting or for malpractice or defective workmanship in a property, but obviously the police would have that. So our protocol immediately would be referral to the local inspector or through the community hub to share that intelligence. Thanks.
Thank you. Is that okay, Jim? Joe?
Yeah, that's fine.
Thanks. It's on the same subject. The first I really became aware of of specifically what was being proposed and what would be expected, as opposed to the general direction of travel after Grenfell, was with leaflets through the door, which looked pretty official, looked like official leaflets and guidance from the Scottish Government that were in fact a company promoting themselves and promoting a service. And I do think there's an issue here, and I don't necessarily think it's one that the fire service or for the station commander to resolve. But I do think there is an issue about how we get independent and impartial advice or government advice to people. So my question, because for all the reasons that sort of David Watson and Jim Wardhall have alluded to, so can I just come back to what is the intelligence that we have just now about whether it's poor workmanship or fakes being used or people are being charged for a product that they do not need, because you've set out the variety of ways in which people can become compliant with the legislation. So I'm just wondering what the feedback is just now, and if you're not able to answer that, that's fair enough. I can go and take that up with trading standards at the council, but I'm just curious about the extent to which this is a problem right now, because based on what I have seen, I am quite nervous about it.
Okay. Council, the only intelligence that I have, I believe it came from North Lanarkshire. What there was people going from door to door, whether they were promoting their work or promoting the installation and saying that they could do it for a price. I'm not privy to any information in terms of South Lanarkshire, but just needless to say, if that information did come to light, then immediately we would be sharing it with council colleagues and we would be sharing it with Police Scotland.
Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any other hands, so thank you very much for the presentation, Phil. It was very useful, and your answers have been very, very helpful. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, and I think it's just a step moving forward, potentially to come back, because we're developing some ward level ownership between the different watches and certainly the whole time stations, not within the retained stations. So I would like to come back, and very much I think this is a start where we can work in partnership and try and re-energise those partnerships that we had pre-COVID to move forward in terms of, with the aim of obviously protecting the community to the best of our ability, because that's what we're about now. And even if you look at the new performance frameworks that are coming out from government, it's all about prevention is better than cure. So if we can prevent a fire or an unintentional injury happening within the home, then that's good news for us. Okay, so thank you everybody and for taking the time. Apologies about my IT skills. I was my former life I was a brickie, so I never got my low grade in computing. So apologies about that. So, but look forward to working with you in the future. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much again. Very useful help. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye now. Bye bye.
Take care. Bye bye. Moving on to agenda item 4, and that's participatory budgeting, education resources. It's on pages 7 to 14. And I'll ask Laura to speak to that one. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, councillors. I'm delighted to be with you this afternoon to give you an update on participatory budgeting within education resources. And as mentioned, it's pages 7 to 14. So I'll just take you through this. Just now we're asking you just to note this report today. So on page 9, you will see that the total participatory budgeting spend for the East Kilbride area is £130,353 which equates to 8% of the East Kilbride Pupil Equity Fund allocation, if you like. When we ask schools to look at this, we ask them to put aside a minimum of 5% of the pupil equity funding. And you can see here that a number of our schools have actually put more towards this, and it equates to that 8% on average across the East Kilbride area. If we move on to page 10, there's a further breakdown there of the number of schools that have allocated the 5%. So you can see there in page 10 that 27 schools have allocated 5% of their pupil equity funding, with a further 8 schools allocating a little bit more, with one school allocating up to 15%, which is really, really good. It's great that schools have really committed to this and given money to the public and to the stakeholders to get a say in how the money is spent. So then on pages 11 through to 14, what I have done is I've given you a breakdown for each of the learning communities. So on page 11, there's the Calder Glen Learning Community. On page 12, we have Duncanrig. On page 13, we've got the St Andrews and St Bride's Learning Community. And on page 14, we've got the Straven Learning Community. And these pages give you a breakdown of the school by school, how much each primary school and each secondary school have allocated, which percentage of their pupil equity funding they've allocated, and what the total spend is with regards to that. You will note that for the Straven Learning Community, there is not an amount noted for Gilmerton Primary School, and the reason for that is that they are not allocated pupil equity funding due to their low free school meal entitlement there, so they don't have any pupil equity funding, and that's why they're not included in page 14. So at the bottom of each of those pages, there's a total participatory budgeting spend, which has been outlined for each of the learning communities, and it also gives the average participatory budgeting spend also. So schools have allocated the money, and they're very much now in the process of the voting and the generation of ideas, which then goes to the vote. We have asked schools to submit to Education Resources on Friday this week. So Friday the 8th of October, schools are submitting to us the outcome of the participatory budgeting process. So we're getting returns in as we speak, and hopefully at the next area committee meeting, we'll be able to give you that school by school breakdown of what the outcome of the vote is, and be able to share that with you. So our schools have they really have embraced the participatory budgeting, and I'll give you a couple of examples of from the East Kilbride area of how some of our schools have tackled that. So I'll give you a couple of primary schools and a secondary school example. So Mossnewt Primary School, they actually put out a video of their pupils explaining each of the different votes, what the options of the votes were. And they also had a wall display, which the pupils then stuck wee stickers on to put their vote up. The parent vote, it was an electronic vote for them. At Halfmerk Primary School, they also did a wall display, but the wall display was for their staff vote, so that was put up in the staff room, and that was a good way for staff to put their vote up. And they got pupils to vote by putting lolly sticks in a box, so quite a kind of active way for the pupils to vote. They had the pictures up of what each of the votes were, and they put some lolly sticks in the box. Straven Academy, our secondary schools, they posted online videos explaining what each of the votes and what each of the options were, and they produced an online Google form where the stakeholders could submit their votes together. So we've had a really wide variety of ideas, some of them being really active, some of them being paper-based, some of them being electronic, and the stakeholders and school have really embraced the opportunity, and they've done well through marketing it. From an education point of view, we've supported the schools. We've provided the participatory budgeting leads in schools with a Microsoft Teams page where we can answer their questions quickly, and where we've been sharing some of that good practice. We've been sharing some of the posters, some of the wall displays, some of the photos, and that's giving other schools ideas on how to tackle this agenda. I'm not sure if you follow our @SLC Equity Twitter feed, but it's been really active with tweeting and retweeting some of the school examples. And if you go to that, you'll see some of the examples that I posted that I've just explained to you there. So hopefully next area committee, I'll be able to share with you the school by school breakdown, and we'll also bring with you some more case studies, which gives you a wee bit more depth as to how they've tackled that in their schools. I'll now open up to any questions. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Laura. Joe, I think you were first.
Yeah, thanks, Laura, and thanks for. I suppose what I feel I have a handle on here today is how the participation, takes place. So the way in which schools are promoting it, and the way in which votes are being taken, and also understand from the figures that come with the report what the money. What I'm looking for is, and I know you said you'd maybe bring these to a future report when we see the outcomes, but is it possible just to expand on some of the examples of what the projects are? To come back to that point, and I'll check out the Twitter feed, but I would just be curious about that. And can I return to the point I raised at the last meeting? Given that the funding in question is the Pupil Equity Fund, and it is there for a specific purpose, I want to make sure that we're not diluting its purpose in any way in the name of participatory budgeting, because that money to me is there to ensure, educational opportunities for everyone and fairness in education. There are good reasons for why that money exists. And then my next question, other than having some examples then, is really just to understand, am I right in saying that there are other local authorities that have excluded the Pupil Equity Fund from their participatory budgeting exercises? And if that's the case, to what extent is South Lanarkshire an outlier, or to what extent are those other local authorities outliers?
Thank you. I'll try and remember all your points. In terms of the Pupil Equity Funding, I'll take that point first. I'm not 100% sure what other authorities are doing and why they may have excluded the Pupil Equity Fund from their participatory budgeting. Personally, I absolutely agree with that. Pupil equity funding has got to be spent in the way that it was intended, and that we've got to adhere to the national guidance around all of that. And that has been part of the training that we have given the participatory budgeting leads, to ensure that any options are adhering to that. We have had to support schools quite heavily with that, and they've found that quite difficult in places. And we've had to veer some schools off some of that universal spend of things that they would want to spend maybe a core budget on. And I think that's one of the difficulties we've had with the fact that participatory budgeting for South Lanarkshire has been chosen to be done through Pupil Equity Fund, and that actually schools would have probably found it easier if that was done through the core budget, because there's not the restrictions around what the spend is. We're also asking all staff, all parents to vote on this, and all parents or all families wouldn't necessarily benefit from the Pupil Equity Fund. So there's issues around that as well, and we are aware of that, and we're kind of coaching schools through that. In terms of some of the examples, some schools have identified, for example, that their outdoor space is not very engaging, and that's part of the reason that some of our pupils affected by poverty aren't uptaking their free school meal entitlement. For example, in the secondary school, they don't have those outdoor spaces, the shelters that they can go and sit and have their meal. And that's an area that a school have identified, for example, of a spend. Other schools are going down a sort of cost of the school day route, maybe paying for transport, for example, for supported study. So supported study is something that generally happens after school, but for some of our pupils affected by poverty, they may not be able to attend that because they can't afford the transport home. So it's about putting on the transport to ensure that they can be included in that. Other sort of ideas are snacks more readily available, so that pupils aren't hungry and that they're fed. These are just some of the ideas that have been kind of batted around, but I'll be able to share. I can share much more of them at the next area committee once we get all the options and all the votes in.
Okay. Thanks for that, Laura. Thank you.
No problem.
Thanks very much, Laura. I don't see any other hands. So can we agree to note the report?
Agreed.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks for that, Laura.
Thank you.
Moving on to agenda item 5, and that's the community grant applications in pages 15 to 18. David and Hugh, I know that you've declared an interest. Do you want to come back in after your item's been discussed, been decided?
I'll just leave, and then there's only another 2 community grants, so I'll just don't bother with that.
Okay, what about yourself, Hugh?
I think we've lost Councillor MacDonald from the meeting.
Okay, I'll wait for Councillor Watson to leave then.
That's Councillor Watson left the meeting.
Okay, thank you. So the first one is the East Kilbride Youth Disability Sports Club, and the amount to be awarded is £600. Can we agree on that?
Agreed.
Okay, thank you.
Agreed.
Thank you. The next one is Multiple Sclerosis Society's Planetary Group, East Kilbride, and that's for £250. Can we agree on that?
Yeah, agree.
Agreed.
Thank you. Jim, you've got your hand up?
Yeah, it was just looking at the 4 grants here. I mean, people tend to put in for more than they need for a particular activity, but the Multiple Sclerosis Society put in for 1,000, they got 250. That's an awful lot less when you look at the other groups and look at the general picture of how grants are awarded. Any particular reason why that was downgraded to 25% of what they actually asked for? Was a particular problem there?
Helen, do you want to go in that point?
Yes, we've got some standard guidance for set amounts against sort of set categories, and entrance fees is £250. And I think for administration, that area is 300. So it's to keep those sort of in line.
Thanks, Helen. You okay with that, Jim?
Yeah, okay.
So I think we'd agreed that one.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Next one application is Stonehouse Heritage Group, and that is for £300. Can we agree on that one?
Agreed.
Okay, thank you.
Agreed.
Now, I'll leave the meeting now because I've already declared an interest for the Friends of Stonehouse Park. So I don't know whether you want me to come back in to close the meeting, or if you want me just to thank everyone just now for your attendance. And I'll pass over to Gladys.
It's fine with me, Isabel. Don't be anybody else.
That's fine, Chair.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
No problem.
Well, anticipation, I'll thank you all very much for your attendance, and I'll pass over to Gladys. So thank you, and all take care. Bye-bye.
That's brilliant. Thanks. Bye, Isabel.
Bye.
That's Councillor Dorman left the meeting.
We can't hear the new chair.
Come on, Gladys. It's your big day.
She's having trouble with her IT.
Oh, God. We'll agree it anyway. We'll just agree it anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
We'll just agree it. I mean, whatever.
Gladys, we're just agreeing it. Can't hear you.
Just agree it.
Great contribution, Gladys. Thank you. Great contribution.
A silent partner.
Let it show that EK521 was agreed.
Yes, Chairman, yeah.
A silent partner. Does?
Chair, Margaret Cooper has her hand up.
Margaret's got her hand up.
I didn't know Margaret was here.
She came in late.
I just sent a message on the chat.
Can I check everyone is happy? That's the meeting. We'll stop recording.
Yeah. Oh, Margaret Cooper's got her hand up. Can we let Margaret speak first?
Well, she know it.
Margaret, I'll just take over and say, Margaret, go ahead.
Better late than never. Right, okay.
I've got Councillor Cooper has left the meeting.
Oh. Oh, well.
She's been snubbed.
I just get reconnected as we're finishing. That's great.
We will never know what James Margaret was going to impose upon us.
Right.
Fantastic.
Right. Well, can I suggest then that if we can't hear Gladys, that Jerry appears to be chairing the meeting at this point, and that we can close the meeting, which is, I remind everyone, being recorded.
Yes, I think we're fine. Gladys is okay to close the meeting. Just put your thumb up. Yes, Gladys says it's fine.